This is amazing. So without further ado, I shall move over to John.
I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, John. You sound very loud and clear.
Thank you. Right, okay. I'm John Bostock from Edgehill University. I'm a Senior Learning and Teaching Fellow Reader at the Centre for Learning and Teaching in the university itself. This presentation examines pedagogical content knowledge arising from alternative understandings of teacher development processes by PGCE and CPD scheme participants. The observations on which it's based involve exploring the diversity of these understandings across subject or professionally related disciplines. Historically, teacher development formats are typically consisted of three parts: learning, teaching, theory, i.e. generic pedagogy, or some people say the nuts and bolts, subject-focused learning and teaching, and work practice, often supported by a mentor, subject specialist mentor. A feature of this development was also that student teachers were taught in subject-specific groups, which facilitated commonality of discussion and debate on subject-related themes. And this is no longer the case, as we're all aware. So teacher education is predominantly generic. Groups are mixed in terms of subject or discipline, and the focus on subject-specific teaching is largely absent. I have a strong conviction then that disciplines and subjects are sort of seats of highly specialised knowledge in which professionals as communities of practice engage in developmental dialogues, preserve and enhance that knowledge. A perspective of teacher professionalism, referred to as dual professionalism, requires that participants become expert subject specialists as well as expert teachers. And my observations suggest a lack of opportunity to engage in subject-focused pedagogical discussion, or subject didactic, is the German word subject didactics, despite such specialist knowledge being viewed as essential in teacher development. A personal perspective is offered to render the significance of introducing subject didactic within programs stronger, as I struggle with supporting students' diverse content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and their students' diverse content knowledge and their pedagogical content knowledge. So discussion and debate are key in that, and that's been discussed in earlier presentations. I have been asked actually what the differences are between the German word, the subject didactic, and signature pedagogies. In a nutshell, signature pedagogies define what counts as non-field or a discipline and how things become known. Subject didactic is the process by which the latter is realised and is therefore flexible and open. Slide. Content knowledge in this context therefore refers to academic qualifications in a given discipline between levels 6 and 8. So what is pedagogical content knowledge? Helen, Alex and Emma have answered most of my questions actually, so brilliant. It refers again to the overlap of information about subject knowledge and pedagogic knowledge. And again, to quote Schulman, the most regularly taught topics in one subject area, the most useful forms of representation of those ideas, and the most powerful analogies, illustrations, examples, explanations, and demonstrations. In a word, a way of representing the subject that make it comprehensible to others. Professional requirements in teacher education, such as the UK Professional Standards for Lecturers, can enable dialogue which produces and reproduces concepts around teaching. However, the concepts all remain susceptible to reformulation. Furthermore, these concepts are influenced by the distinct disciplines in which the students on PGCTHE programs and CPD schemes operate. These disciplines can be referred to as communities, i.e. relations between people in activity, and practice as relational interdependence. The students constitute a community of practice in this sense, and in that they construct their identity through participation in their discipline and its environment, which then does shape a particular view of teaching through discipline-related experiences, values, and beliefs. So cohorts are typically diverse on the PGCTHE and in other senses. Composed of senior university academics, teacher educators, investigators from other sectors, and even PhD students with varied research backgrounds. Debates are often about the differences and commonalities of academic practice, yet researching and articulating events in these contexts raises many questions around the significance of subject pedagogy and the development of pedagogical content knowledge. So I support a holistic, practice-based approach to preparing student teachers, arguing that the essential skills knowledge are premised on using academic knowledge to interpret and translate knowledge into pedagogical practice. A cross-professional perspective on teaching practice stresses the importance of three concepts for understanding pedagogies of practice, namely representation, decomposition, and approximation. And the second one is salient because it's described as the essential skill of breaking down a practice into its constituent parts for the purposes of teaching and learning. Subject didactic processes require critical reflection on how subject matter becomes taught matter. So the perspective of decomposition must be understood in terms of a combination of subject content and subject pedagogy. I mentioned in slide 2 how I view departments and disciplines as seats of highly specialised knowledge. Therefore, I situate working within and with disciplinary communities centrally within the processes of educational development. I place my focus on the academic development of teaching and disciplines and suggest that the view that teaching, which is generic, reduces it to technical matter of performance, something you lay on top of your real work, unconnected to the disciplinary community. And that's a real problem to be addressed. Thus, the significance of subject didactic is rendered stronger in terms of identifying, one, disciplinary context and subject decomposition as pivotal in the process of providing more meaningful experiences in developing pedagogical content knowledge. So rhetorically, I ask you, where are the opportunities then, the distinct opportunities to decompose the knowledge of the subject and the appropriate pedagogies? In slides 2 and 6, I quoted Schulman's view of pedagogical content knowledge. The intersection of the two interdependent aspects of teacher knowledge represented an effective and necessary component of teacher education, but no reference is made specifically and practically as to how this is effectively developed. In his favour, Schulman certainly could not have envisaged the growth and diversity of diverse professionals engaged in teaching development during the last decade. According to him, discipline-specific pedagogical knowledge can be explained in ways of representing and formulating the subject that make it comprehensible for others. And that view remains relevant in current context. So again, what is the difference between discipline-specific pedagogy and the teaching methods that are used out of habit in particular disciplines? Schulman's view of discipline-specific pedagogy clearly suggests that disciplines or subjects may be taught most effectively in particular ways, but later work offered definitions which mirror subject didactic in terms of teachers' critical reflection and interpretation of subject matter to show how it can be organised, adapted, and represented for teaching. In other words, how, in German, Fachwissen, knowledge of the subject, becomes Schulfach, that which is taught. So I would argue that this is problematic, where diverse, mixed, and non-mixed cohorts have differing special forms of understanding associated with their respective disciplines. This view can be evidenced in education teaching, where the differing nature of teaching in different discipline areas has also been a subject of debate. Tried by Robson, for example, as subtle and complex, the role of the teacher is in part to induct students into discipline-specific modes of thought, which reflect those of the teacher whose allegiance to the discipline is likely to be stronger than to the institution. Lentz, however, pointed out that while still teaching development units in universities tend to offer professional development programs that assume that teaching skills remain constant in all areas, academic staff fall on the other side of the fence, claiming that teaching in their fields differs from teaching in other disciplines. Yet Burke, it's been suggested that neither teacher educators nor colleges or universities can adequately train teachers because neither has access to the full range skills, knowledge and expertise and up-to-date experience and wisdom that's required. But I'm not convinced by that. But I would, however, concede that what lacks is the first-hand opportunity and space to explore, discuss and apply subject-specific or professional-related knowledge to pedagogical activity. There has also been a legitimate concern that while PGCTHE students may have discipline knowledge and qualifications, they do not necessarily have the breadth of knowledge across the discipline that is needed to teach in it. So this suggests a lack, therefore, not only in pedagogical content knowledge, but also in subject content knowledge. So a systematic programme of development is needed to address these two areas, instead of relying on their professionalism to address deficiencies. And of significance is the need, again, for dialogue and the connection between subject and pedagogy. So I'll go to the next slide. So summarily, what I'd like to do is to summarise the presentation. It contains several central arguments, and I'll recap that in a series of just 5 points. Dual professional identities among students are problematic, since each student brings with them considerable diverse experiential professional practices and the professionally related and specific concept of teacher. So one of the main concerns, second bullet, concerns opportunities to explore and discuss subject knowledge and its distinct pedagogical application. The reasoning behind subject-specific pedagogy relies on the argument that different models of learning may be employed for different subjects. The most powerful theoretical argument for a re-emphasis on promoting exploration and discussion of application of subject knowledge to pedagogical practice is subject didactic, which is lacking in current provision in which I'm familiar. An implicit assumption is that subject expertise alone, rather than knowledge and skills in education, are the chief determinant of the quality of teaching and learning. There are significant drawbacks to the traditional reliance on technical expertise and subject knowledge at the expense of pedagogy, as we know. My concern is how these two aspects of teacher professionalism can be effectively supported and made more explicitly interdependent. So temptation on my part is to attribute my concern to the absence of pedagogical content knowledge development in current programmes, which is only slightly misleading because there can be support through mentoring. Yet all the students encountered have their own established concepts around pedagogy, which are a challenge for me. Subject didactic processes address my concern in abating the Professor Connect I have, but it still must involve deep and critical awareness of the pedagogies and practices within disciplines. And final bullet, this helps further the current debate around supporting subject pedagogy. The affinity of students with the disciplines is strong, yet the quality of the teaching is affected adversely by their limited knowledge of how to teach. So there is an urging to recognise teachers' work as complex and demanding, an improvement in teacher quality requires a reconceptualization of how we prepare a new generation of diverse higher education teachers. And the final slide, number of quotes there from people. Finally, I'd like to refer you to the third bullet, which appears to be the general consensus amongst PGC students. So it's often highly qualified research-focused staff who need to engage in dialogue around teaching and learning. High-level content knowledge is not necessarily an effective determinant of high-level pedagogical content knowledge. And thank you, that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you for that. That was very interesting. And trying to summarise some of these points, I just wonder if anybody would like to post a direct question in the chat to John. If not, I'm quite happy to try and summarise a question from. There's been some discussion around the nature of using the framework of coaching, which obviously doesn't necessarily require an expertise in the discipline, but maybe an expertise in an area in facilitation. And I just wondered what your thoughts were around that. It's obviously you've picked up on those issues, but the role, instead of a mentoring which requires some level of expertise in an area, whereas the coaching role is much more an expertise in facilitation of helping someone out. I just wonder if you want to pick up a few points on that.
Yes, of course. Coaching is absolutely vital. I think that's where I see myself in part of my role as academic developer. That would be as a coach. What the students often want, however, or allude to is an opportunity to really get to grips with their subject knowledge and its recognised pedagogical practice within that subject knowledge. It's a strange one, but it's just something that does arise. And the theoretical components that we discuss, they often say, well, where does this connect with what I'm doing in my subject, you know? And I think in all, it is having the opportunity, either one-to-ones or in groups, specifically around those concepts, so that the student can understand how to apply them. I'm really keen. Recently, I published a couple of papers with different disciplines to actually show that they of course were excellent at their, sorry, not excellent, but good at their subject and what have you, but needed this sort of spurring on to understand how the pedagogy within the research would work. So I still think, yeah, coaching is definitely part of that. Mentoring, yes, but again, that's sporadic, not much of it specifically subject related, in my view.
Thank you for that. There's one last point that was made in the chat. If we've got one last minute on this, is that also subject content may no longer be shaped just by discipline experts, but also by the needs of industry and beyond, and actually combining subjects. And I just wondered if you wanted to just make some final comments around the idea that actually disciplinary experts are not necessarily they have to combine to have that impact.
Indeed, particularly I would say now a Faculty of Health, Social Care and Medicine, interdisciplinary processes and practices now are becoming much more common. So yeah, if I gave the impression that I was looking at one particular person who would be a disciplinary expert who would be able to supervise, just like it was in the distant past, no, I'm not doing it that way, but rather saying how could we get the opportunities for those to discuss teaching and in specifically in their particular discipline, even if it's interdisciplinary as well. That is something that I'm pretty sure would satisfy the curiosity of those who undertake the program. Remember, the students on the PGCTHE only got limited experience of coming into HE, or they've only been around for a few months and so on, and they're bound to be swamped with this sort of, I know my subject, I think, but how do I actually put it across, and what do I do? And we have the observations, we do all that sort of thing. But they do still point to this idea: could I be shown specifically? Could I have a conversation around the discipline approach? Yeah.
Great, thank you, John. And just to move on in terms